Hello, champions, and welcome back to my library. Mr. Chambers here as I am ready to read the next two chapters of Sing Down the Moon by Scott O'Dell. Hopefully this format is working for us where you can either listen to Mr. Chambers, read along with Mr. Chambers by opening up the video and the PDF at the same time, or you've taken the opportunity to try to read the story by itself. So, I know this is a little bit of a different formula to how we normally do these things. I'm trying to not interject as much as I normally would during our science activities or during past videos. I'm trying to give you as much of the story as clearly as possible. I want you to take some time to look ahead, to read through the questions that you'll be answering so that you have a mindset of what questions will be coming up and what questions to listen for or to look for as you read the story yourself, okay? I'm trying to get us more into the mindset that we would be in if we were in class, because that could be happening at the end of October. Okay, so hopefully this format is working for you. Please let me know if you would like me to change this up before I get too far into the book so that I have the text and reading at the same time, so that I ask more questions during our reading or point out more things. But I'm trying to simplify the process so that we get more familiar with what the expectation might be when we come back in person and are reading and then answering questions as we go. So with that being said, today we are on chapter 3 of Sing Down the Moon. I'll be reading chapters 3 and 4 today. There will be 5 to 10 questions in the Google form for you to answer. And without further ado, let us begin. Chapter 3. Early the next morning, our young warriors left for the West Country. They gathered in the night, riding from their homes nearby. All night they danced and sang and beat on drums. It was a big wonder that they had enough strength left to climb into their saddles when daylight came. But as I went out to build the breakfast fire, they sat astride their horses, ready to leave. There were 12 warriors. They wore red paint and in their hair gray eagle feathers. Tall Boy, the leader, rode among them, making certain that everything was in order. I glanced up at him as I stirred the upper ashes alive and set fresh wood. Cedar smoke rose and drifted across the meadow. He must have smelled it, but he did not glance in my direction. He looked very tall in the dim light. I thought what a good name he had taken for himself. It was better than his first name, River Boy, which his father had given him. He had carried it now for 2 springs and a summer, since the day that he killed the brown bear beyond Rainbow Mountain. He had brought the skin home and said, Tall Boy had taken it, pointing to himself. After that, everybody called him by this name. With the first flash of sun on the canyon wall, the men rode out of the meadow. Tall Boy led the way, moving briskly on his white pony. He did not look to either side, nor at those who had come to wish the warriors farewell, nor at me. He looked straight in front of him, his bold chin thrust out and his mouth drawn tight. My mother watched him go by. Then she said, I hope that he does not kill another bear. If he does, he will call himself Very Tall Boy, and we will have much trouble with him. My mother did not like him, but I did not mind. His haughty ways, for his sake, I wish he would kill another bear. The warriors reached the end of the meadow, and Tall Boy led them across the stream. On the far bank, he turned for a moment and glanced over his shoulder, then raised his hand. I thought he might be waving at me, so I waved back. I watched until he disappeared and the sounds of hoofs died away. After breakfast, I drove my sheep to the mesa. White deer and running bird were already there with their flocks. When the sheep had settled down, we sat under a tree and talked about the warriors. We talked and laughed together all the morning. At noon, the two girls left to move their flocks. An eagle was soaring overhead on a wind that did not blow here on the mesa, and I watched until it drifted out of sight. A herd of white-tailed antelope came to graze among my sheep. I was driving them away when I heard Running Bird call. She was standing on a ledge that jutted out over the canyon. She pointed down with 2 quick thrusts of her hand. As I ran toward her, I heard the sound of a gun. I went to the ledge where she stood and gazed down into the canyon. Far below, moving along the river, was a line of horsemen. There were 10 of them. They were not Indians. They carried long rifles slung to their saddles, and their hats were broad-brimmed and turned up at one side. They were white soldiers who lived to the south of our canyon at Fort Defiance. I knew them because they had ridden in through our canyon on a day last summer. "What shall we do?" Running Bird said. She was frightened. "Shall we hide?" I was frightened too, but I said calmly, "No, let us stay here and watch." "But last summer they threatened to come back and burn our village," Running Bird said, "and they're back." "They would burn our village if we did not keep the peace," is what they told us. We have kept the peace. "But our warriors are away now on a raid," said Running Bird. "They have gone to raid our enemies, the Utes," I said. "That is different from raiding the white man." As we watched, the first of the soldiers came to the village. He got off his horse and went to the hogan where Old Bear lived. Dogs were barking, but there were no other sound in the village. Then Old Bear came out of the hogan and greeted the soldier, and they went inside. The other soldiers sat on their horses and waited, with their rifles held across their laps. On the barrels of their rifles were fastened long, sharp knives. That is why they were called them Long Knives. The sun crawled up the sky. It was a long time before the Long Knife came out of the hogan. We watched while he mounted his horse, and the 10 rode away, one by one, out of the canyon. Not until they were far out on the plain, until they were a small cloud of dust, did my people come out of their houses. Running Bird said, "I want to go down and learn what the Long Knife told Old Bear." She grasped my arm. I held back, remembering the time that I had left the sheep when the storm came. "You go," I said. "I will watch your sheep until you return." She ran across the meadow and disappeared. I heard the clatter of stones as she went down the trail. Her sheep were wandering, and with the help of my black dog, I gathered them. Running Bird did not return until it was time to drive the sheep home. She was out of breath from the long climb and did not speak until we were halfway down the trail. I had to ask her twice what the Long Knife had said to Old Bear before she answered me. He asked Old Bear, she said, "Where are your warriors?" Old Bear told him that they were in the north, hunting in the north country. And the Long Knife said that was good. But if they were not hunting, if he learned that they were on a raid somewhere, he would come back and burn the houses and kill everyone in the village. Even the women and the children he would kill. Even the sheep and the dogs. That was the last thing he said to Old Bear. "What did Old Bear say?" I asked her. He said he would keep the peace. He would keep it unless our village was attacked by the Utes, or the Spaniards, or our other enemies. Then he would fight as he had fought before when they had come to plunder us. I hope Tallboy does not raid among the Utes, I said. Or if he does, White Deer said, the soldiers will never hear of it. He had reached the stream and the sheep were wading toward the far shore. Suddenly, Running Bird put her arm around my waist. Tallboy is very brave, but not foolhardy, Running Bird said. He will come back safely, and he will not bring back a Ute girl. You will see that I am right. She gave me a squeeze and walked on through the river in silence. Dusk was falling and blue smoke rose from all the hogans. I drove my sheep into the corral and closed the gate and sang to myself as I walked homeward. Chapter 4. Our hogan was quite the night. All the hogans in our village were quiet. The long knives' threat hung over us. Had our young warriors been home, there would have been much talk and chanting and threats against the long knives. But there were only women and children who had nothing to say, and old men who had seen the power of white man and had feared it. The evening fires went out early. The night was long, and I was glad when dawn came. At the first gray light, I opened the gate and drove the sheep across the river and up the trail. As the sheep bells tinkled in the silent canyon, I sang little songs to myself. Some were happy, some were not, but all of them were meant for the ears of the gods who listened. When I reached the mesa, the sky was gold along the edges and pink overhead. With my black dog, I drove the flock beyond the aspen grove to a place where the grass was uncropped. Running Bird came soon, and the two flocks grazed together. My sheep were easy to find because they were marked with red dye, a red circle on each ear. That afternoon, when the sun was hot, I would mark the 10 sheep my mother had given me, using 2 red circles to show that they were mine. Running Bird began to talk about the soldiers. I listened to her, nodding and making polite sounds, but I was thinking about my sheep all the time. The ewes my mother had given me would lamb in the summer. When spring came again, I might have 20 or 30 sheep of my own to drive to the mesa. 30 sheep! The thought made me dizzy with happiness. Right at that moment, Running Bird asked me what my father had said about the soldiers. I jumped up and began to dance. I could not help it, but thinking of 30 sheep grazing in the meadow, each with 2 red circles on its ears. Clouds drifted in from the north, but they were spring clouds, white as lamb's wool. In the stream that wandered across the mesa, speckled trout were leaping. Jays were chattering in the aspen trees, and 2 little red-tailed hawks came and hovered over the meadow. It was the barking of my black dog that first alarmed me. None of the sheep had strayed. Everything was peaceful in the meadow. There was no reason for my dog to bark. Then close to the aspen grove, I saw 2 long shadows. I saw their shadows before I saw the men. They were not soldiers, because they did not wear bright buttons on their coats and bright clothes around their neck. They were dressed in deerskin, with tall hats and silver spurs, riding horses that had heavy silver bits. They were Spaniards. I jumped to my feet. They rode up at a trot and reined in a few paces away. The one who spoke had a soft voice and many white teeth and long black hair. "A fine day," he said, "but we are lost. Which is the quick way to Corn Mountain?" I knew little Spanish then, but not so much as I do now. Yet I understood him. I pointed to the northwest and said, "That there was a trail near the rim of the canyon, and the Corn Mountain was 2 leagues beyond as the eagle flies." While I was saying this, I saw something that I should have seen before. The other Spaniard held the reins of 2 horses, which he had been leading. Their saddles were empty, and I knew in the time that a breath takes that these men were slavers. For many years now they had come to the Navajo country and stolen girls to sell to families in the town who needed girls to cook for them and to wash their floors. One of the Navajo girls had escaped and came back to Canyon de Chelly and told us what had happened to her. The man with the white teeth glanced in the direction I was pointing, but from the corner of my eye I saw the other Spaniard came toward me. Running Bird screamed and fled across the meadow and screamed a second time. A Spaniard who had asked me the question caught her long before she reached the trail. Suddenly there was cloth in my mouth, and my hands were behind me and tied hard with a thong. My black dog was rushing around, barking and nipping at their heels. The Spaniard, who had a flat-shaped head and a yellow scar on his chin, struck him with a rifle, and he lay still. Then they put us on the 2 horses that they had brought and tied our hands to the saddle horns. "We will not harm you," the Spaniard with the white teeth said. "You will take place you are going. Do not try to flee. You will like it." We went south along the mesa. As we passed the head of the trail, I looked for White Deer, hoping that she would be coming up with her flock and would see us. But I saw no one. We took the dawn trail to the lowlands and at dusk reached the river far below our village. That concludes chapters 3 and 4 of Sing Down the Moon for today's reading. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to as Mr. Chambers read along. There's 5 to 10 questions in Google Classroom for you to answer. And I'll talk to you real soon. Thank you. Bye.